Hey guys, welcome to Man Medicine, where we talk about how men can optimize their health and escape the collapsing U.S. healthcare system. So one of the more common excuses that I hear, and I hear a lot of them, is when it comes to training, is I don't have time to lift or I don't have time to work out. And that's bullshit. Okay, you do have time. And I'm going to show you this paper here that maybe can give you a little bit of guidance and dispel some of the myths that are out there. One of which, is that you have to spend 2 hours a day at the gym, 4 or 5 plus days a week in order to make any sort of meaningful progress. And that's quite frankly, it's just not true. So the paper we're going to go over today is by, among other people, a gentleman by the name of Brad Schoenfeld. And Brad Schoenfeld, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, is he's like relatively well known in the exercise science world. He's been a fairly prolific author and researcher, and has put out some really good studies that have helped sort of clarify. I know he's answered a lot of questions that I've had over the years about what's the best way to train, but this paper is entitled "No Time to Lift: Designing Time-Efficient Training Programs for Strength and Hypertrophy: A Narrative Review." It's in the journal called Sports Medicine, published relatively recently here in 2021. So it's a rather lengthy article, and I'm not going to go over all of the details in here, but I'm going to hit some of the highlights for you guys, because this is pretty much what he's advising in this article is pretty much what I talk to my patients about doing, because most of us are not professional athletes. Most of us are not professional or aspiring professional bodybuilders, right? The kind of training that you need in those sorts of scenarios is going to be different than certainly what I recommend for most men and what he talks about in this article, all right? And we'll go into some of the details about that here in a second. So just as a background for you guys, I've talked about this in other podcasts, but I started getting very serious about weight training, in the latter part of my high school years. And it all started when my parents got me this book here, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding, the original one in yellow. I think there's been an updated version since my day. But I devoured this book and just read it like cover to cover. And if I recall, there were 3 programs in there that Arnold advocated, and I have no idea if he actually used these programs or not. He probably did, but there was a basic, an intermediate, and an advanced. And again, I don't have this book anymore. Those of you guys that do can look at it and get the specifics. But the basic program, if I recall, was advocating somewhere. It was roughly like 5 to 10 sets per body part, split over, I think it was over 5 days. And, then there was an intermediate program, which essentially just added more volume to that. So maybe like 15 to 20 sets per body part. And then there was an advanced program, which was even more volume, like 25 plus sets per body part. Even the intermediate workout, though, was relatively long. I recall that workout start to finish taking me, certainly more than 90 minutes at a time. So, 5 days a week, I was doing 90 minutes in the gym. And to be honest, I got really good results from this program, because obviously when you're a beginner, the first year especially, but really probably the first 2 years, you're never going to make gains like you do in those first 2 years. It's fun. It's like almost every workout you're getting stronger in that first year. You're getting bigger, and throw in the fact that I was like a 17-year-old kid with presumably pretty high testosterone and reasonably good genetics. I think I gained like 25 pounds of muscle within that first year, possibly more. And it was just growing like gangbusters. But I do recall every time I tried to up my volume and go to the intermediate program, I just started getting worn out. I didn't know what was happening at the time because I was a young kid, but I was overtraining. My joints hurt all the time. I was tired. My motivation, I stopped looking forward to going to the gym. So I kept trying to advance to the intermediate program because he said, after the first year, you should go to this intermediate. And then I kept having to go back to the basic program. And, as long as I stayed on the basic program, I continued to make progress, but every time my volume went up to the intermediate program, my progress stopped and I felt terrible. I was clearly overtraining. I just didn't know, I didn't have a word for it, at the time. So when I got into college, I kept my higher volume approach like this, but I split things up a little bit. And I obviously, over those 4 years, I experimented with a lot of different types of workouts. But more or less, I ended up on some sort of a variation of like a 3-on, 1-off program. So I was still in the gym, 4 to 5 days out of the week. Also for 90 minutes to 2 hours because, I was a pre-med, so I was busy and I was studying a lot. But as an undergrad, you got time. And I'm not a big partier and drinker and stuff like that. So I didn't have much of a social life. So I didn't have anything better to do than study organic chemistry and physics and then go to the gym for 2 hours with my buddies and lift weights. And again, on that program too, I made I got really, really big gains when I was in college. And I got up over like 250 pounds. I was, squatting 600 and benching over 400 by the time I was 19, 20 years old. So, that kind of a program worked really well for me. But everything changed when I got into medical school. All of a sudden, the demands on my time were just insane compared to what things were like. I thought I was busy as an undergrad, but med school was like on a whole nother level. So a buddy introduced me to Mike Mentzer's heavy duty program, which was from his original book here it was a 3-day-a-week program, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I know in subsequent iterations of his book, he has drastically scaled down the frequency of the workouts for more rest. But in this original program, from what I recall, it was like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday program, and it was 1 to 2 sets per body part. The workouts were great. They were 30 minutes, very, very high intensity, training to failure, using some various high intensity techniques that I'll talk about here in a second. And wow, I really responded to that. It was amazing. Not only could I be in the gym for 30 minutes, but I was actually making phenomenal progress on that. I got really strong, even stronger than I had in college, which kind of shocked me because I had radically decreased the volume, although I certainly increased the intensity. I got so strong, eventually I suffered a pec tear actually getting ready for a powerlifting competition, which ended my powerlifting career because it took about 100 pounds off my best bench press. And if any of you guys know anything about East Coast powerlifting, it was pretty damn competitive to begin with. So that pretty much was the end of my powerlifting career, which was fine anyway because I was starting to get ready to go into my clinical rotations, 3rd and 4th year, and I wouldn't have had time to train for a powerlifting meet. But the point is, despite drastically decreasing the volume, I did really well on this program. So as a result of that, I became kind of a HIIT advocate, a bit of a zealot in the HIIT department. And to be fair, there was at the time pretty good research out there showing that when trained to high intensity, 1 set was as good as 3 to 5 sets. And so that's what I advocated. 1 set to failure per body part is all you need. Anything more than that is overtraining, all the stuff that you hear HIIT guys saying. Well, you live and you learn. And, over the last 20 years, there's been a huge amount of additional information that's come out, additional research from guys like Brad Schoenfeld and a number of other guys in the field. And it just, has essentially kind of busted that myth that 1 set to failure is optimal. Now, 1 set to failure is totally still a viable way to train, certainly for the recreational athletes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But again, if you want optimal hypertrophy, the data right now is kind of overwhelming that volume is probably the most important thing that you need to focus on. The problem is, more volume equals more time in the gym. And, my training philosophy has always been, certainly as a busy professional, I want to maximize my results and I want to minimize my time in the gym. So I think of it as an equation, R over T, results over time. So I want to maximize the numerator and I want to minimize the denominator. So I actually still advocate HIIT training if you're like me and that's what you're interested in, and assuming you're not, and again, a aspiring pro bodybuilder, a professional athlete, and you have a busy career, maybe you got a family, like you can't afford to be in the gym 5 days a week. I still actually think that that's the best way to train. If I wanted to be a professional bodybuilder, which I certainly don't, and certainly probably couldn't at this stage of my life, but maybe if I was younger, I would probably not train this way. I would get a hold of Brad Schoenfeld or Mike Israetel, at Renaissance Periodization, or one of those guys that, and I would help them or have them help me put together like a periodized program, which at this point I think the research shows is probably the optimal way to train for strength and hypertrophy. Again, it doesn't mean that this sort of low volume HIIT style training is useless. In fact, it's not useless at all, but it may not be the optimal way to do that. So what I've done over the years is tweaked my high intensity workouts in such a way that I still minimize the amount of time that I spend in the gym, but I also can increase the volume, which is obviously the key to strength and hypertrophy gains long term. You have to slowly try to increase volume. Now I know there's HIIT guys out there that are like throwing their hands up in the air and like guffawing about this, but when I say that volume is important, and when you hear other people much more knowledgeable than I am about this sort of stuff, talk about volume, you have to remember it's volume within the context of proper recovery. It doesn't mean, like Mike Menzer used to say, all these people, they think more, it's this more is better. Well, more is not better, but more is better within the context of proper recovery. So if you can recover from a workout, then the more workouts you can do, the more volume, generally that will translate into more hypertrophy, more strength gains, but it's still within the context of proper recovery. So I just feel like I need to say that, because I'm not saying that more is better. Okay, I'm not saying that if that 10 sets are good, then 100 sets is better. Like, clearly that's not the case. You have to have proper recovery. So anyway, having said that, I don't have a lot of time to spend in the gym. So I need to maximize my efficiency there, and I want to get as much out of that workout as I possibly can. Now, the other factor for me is I like to do jiu-jitsu. So that's, especially as a guy who's turning 50 this year, jiu-jitsu is hard on your body. I have to factor in additional recovery time. So, there's another element into this that perhaps you might not have. Or if you do, you understand what I'm talking about, is that you have to factor in recovering from these jiu-jitsu workouts. You have to factor in some of these nagging little injuries that you get from jiu-jitsu. I'm not willing to give up jiu-jitsu. I love jiu-jitsu. I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. So I just factor that into my workouts. And what that means is that oftentimes there are additional rest days between my lifting workouts, because I'm either training jiu-jitsu or there's days where I'm sore, my joints hurt, and I need to just take an extra day. And I don't feel bad about that whatsoever. In fact, I think that's smart, and is probably one of the keys to my longevity in all of this. So why don't we just cut to the chase? Okay, so this is a summary from this article, and it's quite good. And I want to run through all of these with you here, these 4 things that I've highlighted. Okay, so the first question is, how much and how heavy should you train? The crux of this article is that, obviously, like I said, volume matters. Higher volume is generally better than lower volume. But in terms of volume, you probably should do at least, what they're saying is at least 4 weekly sets per muscle group. Okay? Now that's per week. So you can break that up however you want. If you want to train a muscle group twice in a week, so maybe that would be like 2 sets one day, 2 sets the other. If you want to do all 4 sets on one day, that's probably equivalent. So it's not so much the frequency of the workouts, but the volume over the course of time. That as long as the volume is the same, that probably doesn't matter the frequency so much. So minimum of 4 weekly sets per muscle group. And then it says increase volume when possible, up to 10 plus weekly sets, depending on time constraints. And further down in this, there's some tricks that you can do to increase volume, maybe up to that 10 plus weekly set range without increasing time as much. So, because 10 sets is a lot. But there's some tricks you can use to make that a little bit more time efficient. In terms of rep range, he's recommending somewhere between 6 and 15 reps. Okay. Now here's the thing. He mentions here lighter loads, 15 to 40 reps, can be used if training is performed close to failure. So this came as somewhat of a revelation to me a number of years ago when this research came out. I always thought that, you got to do 8 to 12 reps. That's the best for hypertrophy. Well, it turns out that that's not necessarily the case. And for me, this is extra good news because I have a lot of joint issues at my age. I've been doing jiu-jitsu forever. I've been lifting heavy weights forever. I had a career in the military. So I've got bilateral rotator cuff tears. I've had a full rotator cuff reconstruction, multiple herniated discs, lumbar fusion. The list goes on. Okay, I'm like held together with duct tape and chicken wire. So for me, I don't want to be loading my joints with heavy weights in the gym at this stage in the game. Okay, I used to love to do that in my 20s. I used to love to get under a squat rack and step back with 5 or 6 plates on each side and watch that bar bend. It was cool. Okay, if I did that, I'd be in a wheelchair and have a catheter. I don't want to do that. Okay, so the good news is you can do these higher reps, which obviously put less strain on your joints, and as long as you go to failure, you can get essentially the same amount of hypertrophy as you get with these heavier loads. So that's good news. The next one is what should you train? What he mentions here is essentially you want to use compound movements. So we're not talking about isolation movements like a preacher bicep curl, although you certainly can do those. He's saying one lower body exercise, one pulling and one pushing exercise. And he says preferably bilateral multi-joint exercises. And that's important, right? Because since volume is important, if you can do an exercise that hits multiple, that spans more than one joint, so it hits multiple muscle groups, then that counts towards your volume, right? So a set of incline dumbbell presses, for example, you may be doing that as part of your chest workout, but you are adding volume into your shoulder work because obviously your deltoids are involved and your triceps. So that counts towards the volume in those body parts as well. So it makes sense to do these, multi-joint compound movements in order to increase volume. Use machines and or free weights based on training goals, availability, and personal preference. I used to prefer free weights, and now that I'm older, I like machines because there's an added safety factor there. The other thing too is I train by myself most of the time. I love having a training partner when I can get one, but my current training partner is about to leave and move to another state, so I'll be back to training solo. And it's a lot safer to go to failure on a Cybex machine or a plate-loaded hammer strength. So if I dump the weight on that, I might make a little bit of noise, but nobody's getting hurt. Okay, whereas obviously if I'm doing a set of squats or something like that, I could easily dump that weight and end up putting myself in the hospital. So I'd rather not do. So now this next one's really important. Time-saving strategies, drop sets, rest pause training, and supersets. I love these. This is how I've managed to increase the volume in my workouts without significantly increasing the amount of time that I spend in the gym. So just real quick, a drop set for you guys that don't know is, I'll use an example. You can do you're doing a set of chest presses on a machine, let's say a plate-loaded machine. You do 15 reps to failure. You immediately drop the weight by however much you want. I usually drop it by a third, maybe 50%, and then you keep going. So it's a drop set. You drop the weight. So that now you have squeezed in 2 sets. And whereas you are adding a little bit more time, but you are being very, very efficient with that. And they're really hard. There's a lot of burn involved, and you can do multiple drop sets. I've done that before, where you reduce the weight like 2 or 3 times. So by the end, you're pressing like 10 pounds. People are looking at you strange, like, why are you straining so hard with the 10 pounds on each side of the bar or whatever? But that's a way to add extra sets and volume. And that's quite intense, and I really like it, and that's mainly what I do. Rest pause, I don't use that so much. There's different ways to do rest pause, but the way I think about it is, you get a very heavy weight, like something that's like maybe 80% of your 1 rep max, so you probably maybe only do it 2 to 3 reps at a time. So you do 2 or 3 reps, which is all you can do. You put it down, you rest for a little while, maybe, 10, 20 seconds, and then you pick it up and you do it again. And maybe you'll only get 1 or 2. Put it down, rest again, 20, 30 seconds, whatever the case may be, and then you do it again. All right. So, perfectly good way to increase volume. I don't typically do that. I just don't like to train heavy anymore just because of my joints. And then supersets are awesome too. The original Mensa program had some supersets that I really liked. For example, the chest workout, you would do a set of dumbbell flies, or you could use like the pec deck machine. But at the time that I did dumbbell flies to failure, and then you had the incline bench press already set up. So without rest, you would go immediately, so you do your dumbbell flies to failure, and then you go straight over to the machine, and you would do incline presses also to failure. And so that's 2 sets right there, but really it's kind of just like 1 set, very time efficient. My favorite, this wasn't in his workout, but my favorite superset for legs back in the day was I would do a set of squats to failure, and at about the 15 rep range. And then I would have the leg press standing by already loaded with plates. So I would squat to failure, which if you've never squatted to failure, I highly recommend it. It's absolutely brutal. But at that point, you feel like you're going to collapse. You're not done. You go straight from there and you go over to the leg press, and then you start, hitting the leg press, and you do, a set of leg presses also to failure with no rest, or as minimal amount of rest as possible. And at my old gym in college, it was convenient because the leg press was literally like 10 feet away from the squat rack. So thank God I didn't have to walk very far, because I'd basically be crawling on my hands and knees. So as he mentions here, these kind of techniques, it says roughly halves the training time compared to traditional training. And that's the whole point, right? Results over time. We want to minimize the amount of time. So these time-saving strategies, he calls them, I call them high-intensity techniques, I think are super valuable. And I use them almost in every single workout. So, and then he wraps things up here. There's a section in there where he talks about warming up and stretching that I'm not going to go too deep into. He's kind of poo-poos like stretching before a workout. I'm not so sure how I feel about that. For me, obviously, as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, stretching I think is extremely valuable. And so I have a stretching regimen that I do, before and after every single workout. So I do think that there's some value to stretching, having good range of motion in all your joints. I think that's something that it's only going to benefit you, and having increased mobility is something that's going to benefit you as you get older. So I think stretching is good. And then the warm up says general warm up should not be prioritized when time is of an essence. And, I think what he means by this is, you do the minimum amount of work of warming up that you need, that whatever that may be for you, that you need to feel safe, and that you're not going to pull something and injure yourself. So that might be different for different body parts. Like, I don't need to do a ton of warming up for a set of pull-ups, but with my back and my knees and my hips and everything the way that they currently are, like when I get ready to do a set of leg presses to failure, I spend some time warming up. Like I do a number of sets before that with much lighter weight where I go through a full range of motion, and I just make sure that all of my joints are lubed up. I'm feeling good because, in the past I have been injured by not properly warming up. And so, but general principle is like you don't want to do more warm up than you need to. So, I don't have any other specific guidance for you on that. Just do whatever you think is necessary so that you don't get hurt and you feel confident when you go into the lift. So that's all I want to talk about to guys today. I mean, you could go on for hours, in terms of, talking about training. I will emphasize again, I talk about this all the time with my guys. In my opinion, if you want to age as well as you possibly can, I think that some form of resistance training is mandatory. You've got to keep up your muscle mass as you get into your older years. It's crucially important. I talk a lot about building up as much muscle tissue as you can before the age of 50. I know that's kind of an arbitrary number on my part, and I recognize that, but it only gets tougher after that. It really starts getting tougher after 35 in many cases, but certainly after the age of 50, building muscle tissue, it just certainly does not come as easy as it does when you're in your 20s. So, those of you guys that are listening to me, if you are in your 20s, now is the time. You need to start getting on a good strength training program, whatever that may be, to try to put on some muscle tissue, because the more that you put on before the age of 50, the more is going to stick with you as you get into 60s, 70s, and 80s. And as I say over and over again, if you want to be good at 80, you cannot afford to be average at 50. You have to be pretty fucking awesome at 50 if you want to be good at 80. So, which is obviously what I want for you guys. I want you guys to have a full, rich life. I don't want to see you in the emergency room with a broken hip, with a catheter, and dying of sepsis. Okay, I want you out, with your significant other, enjoying your family, your grandchildren, going on cruises, and living the good life. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. I'm gonna go to the gym. I'll see you next time. Bye. All Man Medicine video and audio has been created and shared online for informational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute the practice of medicine or professional healthcare services of any kind, including the giving of medical advice. I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship has been established. This content is not meant to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied upon solely for that purpose either. The only purpose of this content is to present peer-reviewed, research-backed health information for your consideration. As always, rely on the advice and guidance of your personal physician before undertaking any activity presented here, and if in doubt or not comfortable with said activity, practice discretion. Your health is your responsibility and not ours. Finally, I take conflicts of interest seriously. I accept no compensation whatsoever from any private corporations, including pharmaceutical or supplement companies. You can trust that if I recommend a medication, product, or service, it's because I genuinely believe in it and not because I'm being paid to endorse it.